Recording to the cloud. All right. Welcome, people of the pod, to the
pod people.
This will be Dave's acting out episode. Welcome to the final episode of the current run of Office Hours with Karpf and Loge, going on hiatus, going back for temporary guest appearances in places. As always, on this podcast, I'm Peter Loge, an associate professor in the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University. And I'm joined, as always, at least for now, by
you make it sound like one of us is dying.
I'm the director.
Come on,
it's very
man.
close. It's very. Have you seen my job description?
I have. Folks, I am Dave Karpf, associate professor in the School of Media and Public Affairs. This is Office Hours with Karpf and Loge, until Loge stops having office hours and I guess stops caring about his students because he's director. Power's going to his head and he is sunsetting this pod. Notice, to be very clear, we are not ending the podcast. We are putting on a hiatus. I have promised and Peter's promised that we'll bring it back as soon as he's not director anymore. So we'll see how quickly I can run him out of the job.
I'm all about a quick turn of that. But we are coming up for special episodes. For example, and in early October, we're going to be at the rescheduled Buzz Advocacy Summit in Annapolis, Maryland, October 2nd through 4th. I'll put this in the footnotes, which I'll get to in a second. This is an event put on by the Beekeeper Group, a communications firm here in town. And it had to be delayed, as many of you know, because of a tragic death of one of their key employees earlier this summer. So we're glad it's been rescheduled. Our hearts really do still go out to the folks at Beekeeper. We look forward to joining you live in Annapolis on October 4th. And who knows what else will happen. But this is the end of the regular bi-weekly Loge and Karpf ranting into the void.
So just to be clear, because I feel like people get what we're implying here, but we should make it explicit. We're putting this on hiatus and then 2 months later doing a live show. This means that we do bar mitzvahs, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, we do bar mitzvahs.
Weddings,
funerals.
Yeah.
Funerals. I think we should do those. You got Arbor Day. You're like an viral guy. I feel like we should do the Arbor Day tour.
I have often thought of these podcast conversations with you as funerals. So we'll do those.
The funerary tone to them. Yeah. I think we do. Weeks ago, we talked about a piece, I think, from the New Yorker about these niche pop stars, or any pop star really, who make incredible amounts of money by playing private shows, birthday parties, and that sort of thing. And I think that's just our gig. We can liven up nearly anything. Nearly anything. We can't save
except a faculty meeting.
Except a faculty, no, that would end badly for everybody.
Nope. Yeah.
But I think otherwise, and 6-year-olds on dinosaur camp, I feel like that's one we just could not have.
Couldn't have solved it. Anyway, let's get to the material. Let's get to the good stuff.
So we've got first on the footnotes. I did not put them up 2 weeks ago, and nobody complained, and I'm lazy, so I didn't do it. But I'll do last week's or 2 weeks ago's and this week's. And I also do need, this is a humbling correction, an embarrassing correction.
I love this.
I kept talking about professors and thinkers encouraging students to think and be punished for it and being ridden out of town and all of that. And I kept name checking Aristotle when, of course, it was Socrates who drank hemlock with Aristotle. Aristotle then went on to train other rhetors and leaders, but it was clearly Socrates is who I meant. And I'm
Peter Loge confused Aristotle and Socrates. He is shamed for the next 17 generations of his family.
I am.
Also,
luckily I don't have kids, so that's
luckily no kids. But my God, Peter, like if I confuse those two, that's fine. Because who are we kidding? You confuse those two.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's like me mixing up Schatzsnyder and anyone.
This is true. I couldn't sleep that night. I felt incredibly bad. I almost asked us to retape it and delay it, but then I know that would only open me for more abuse. And again, nobody probably noticed.
Also, I never would have let us retape that because that's gold.
Yeah. There's that. That. It was. The point remains, and we're going to talk about this a lot in the heart of the pod, though, that people afraid of young people thinking, people afraid of college professors. Punishing those professors is not a new thing. Again, read I.F. Stone's The Trial of Socrates. or anything about Socrates,
Trial
really.
of
So
Aristotle.
before we, now that's enough. Okay, we get it. We get it. We get it. But are there anything before we, because that's an important stuff. We're going to talk about the stuff, but you've got a couple of cats and dogs before we get to why we need to play offense and stop the absurd assaults on all that is just and right in the world.
Yeah, so I want to take a minute to complain about APSA.
You need to
So I'm
explain to
just
people
gonna,
what that means.
yeah. So APSA is American Political Science Association. It is my main professional association. I am going to the APSA annual meeting next month, and there's been some debates over whether or not one should do so. This is a complicated issue, and I'm going to give you the short version of it because I think there's a comms lesson here. Like the thing that's been bugging me is I think there needs to be space for allies to be good guys, even if they're not going all the way with the strongest demands that you make. So the details here are that the APSA convention was scheduled to be in LA this year, Los Angeles. It's at the LA Convention Center. And the main conference hotel is the Sheraton. The Sheraton is now facing a labor action. It's facing a strike, as are many, many hotels in LA. So the question came up once the strike started a month ago, once the contract ran out with no new contract, point came up that, hey, we're not crossing a picket line to go to APSA, which to be clear, yeah, I'm not crossing a picket line to go to APSA. APSA means important to me, but it's not that important. And the union came out with a statement saying, we are asking APSA to either get everything out of all of those hotels, cancel the hotel blocks, like, full break, or else cancel the meeting and move it online. The APSA Council, which in my experience tends to end up in the right place and tends to be really sloppy in getting there. I saw this with the John Eastman stuff, that they ended up in the right place, and the amount of headaches and sort of self-inflicted wounds were just like, I think they're well-meaning and not very good at crisis comms. So like, I got annoyed with them a bunch of times because they didn't communicate well, but they got to the right place. Like, hats off for that. But they issued some like pretty sloppy statements that got people very mad. But then went ahead and put in the work, moved everything out of the Sheraton, set it up so that one can attend APSA without crossing any picket lines, without entering any hotels that are under a labor action. The thing they weren't able to do was cancel the actual room blocks, because by then it was within a month of the conference, and the contract said people don't need to take those room blocks, but you can't actually cancel them at that point. And they noted in their statement that in order to cancel the conference or move it virtual at this point, there's a bunch of contracts that they would have to cancel that would cost them about like $3 million in cancellation fees. They don't really have the budget for that, so they were going to try not to do that. But they put in the work to make sure that APSA was not going to be forcing anyone to cross a picket line, that they themselves would not be violating the picket line. And once they did that, and I was able to find a hotel in a hotel room in a hotel that has a contract, I said, okay, good, I'm going. And then the union came back, and a bunch of APSA supporters who are strongly pro-labor came back and said, no, that's not good enough. They said you have to cancel and move online. Cancel or move online. And APSA kind of responded saying, guys, we did everything we can kind of do here. We're not going to we're not going to pay $3 million in fees and probably face some lawsuits for canceling all these contracts when we've already made it so no one has to cross picket line. And the response was, okay, you're anti-labor. And that just, like, I think we have to be able to have space to say, you can be pro-labor without costing your organization $3 million that aren't getting paid to anyone in the actual fight. Like, the contract is not with APSA. The APSA is not party to this. They were just having the convention in a big city where the hotels decided that they wanted to screw over their workers. I think it's important not to cross the picket line. And I also think if the union wants to make a stronger demand, I can respect that demand while also saying, guys, that's actually a little too far. None of us are going to cross the picket line, but we're not going to cancel the thing entirely. But I've been watching on what's left of Twitter, and there's not very much of it left, but I've been watching on what's left of Twitter, people trying to make this out as a polarized issue where you're either pro-labor and therefore hating APSA and refusing to ever attend, or you're anti-labor and in with the plutocrats because you're willing to attend the conference. And just sort of the lack of room for solidarity without going to full extremes and making demands of organizations that mean, like, if I was on the APSA board, like, I wouldn't say, yeah, let's just burn $3 million of our budget to show some solidarity. Like, of course not. As a fiduciary, you kind of can't do that. So the whole thing just sort of stuck out at me as an example of comms demands, where if you're not leaving any room for allies to be good but not great, then you make everybody into enemies. And I don't know, man, like that bugs me.
I think you raised a really good point, and this raises a couple other things in the context of other communication strategies. One is the lack of nuance in any debate at all. You're either all of A or all of B. There's no in between. The second is let people agree with you. Right?
Yeah.
Let somebody say, "I'm not going to cross the picket line." You can applaud a little bit. That's great. We'll give you a B, not the A. We're going to give you a B for being with us. Let them come with you, and then bring them with you. Right? Too often people say, "Oh, wow, now I see the light. Trump really is a lunatic. Yeah, you should have been here 5 years ago." Well, yeah, but take them now. Like, again, let people agree with you, build momentum, build power. Don't use it as an opportunity to bunker. Bunkering is a bad comm strategy, and it's bad political strategy. Like, you can't actually then solve problems. You end up sort of dissolving the social tissue we all need. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the big thing.
Actually, I've got a couple other quick things I want to do. And on a way into the big thing, actually, this was from the New York Times on August the 5th. Big piece: global web of Chinese propaganda leads to a U.S. tech mogul. And this intense New York Times investigation looked at a U.S. investor. He built a software company, sold it for a ton of money, and he's been seeding and sending money to a lot of really progressive groups like Code Pink. And it's been sort of diffused. There isn't a cornerstone, right? There isn't, the Karpf Institute for a Better America or something. And in addition to promoting all these really progressive things that all my progressive friends would agree with, like Code Pink, they've been pushing out pro-Chinese government messaging, including excusing the human rights violations against the Uyghurs and others. And this raises a huge ethical question, I think, for advocates, but also an interesting strategic case study. One of the first is the ethical question. One of the first questions you have to ask as an advocate is, whose money will you take? Right? How bad can somebody be before you say no? And how big a check are you willing to turn down? This is related to the APSA question. Like, how much money is on the table? What are the stakes? How good is good enough? Right? If it's 100% pure, then you got to be ready to not take a lot of money. And that means all my good liberal friends now have to walk away from all of this and quit Code Pink and anything else this guy has supported. You say, no, on balance, we'll sort out the Chinese stuff. He's not coordinating officially with the government, all of that. In that case, so, okay, cool. So you want to take Coke money because Coke is funding civil society, civil discourse, good things, institution building, which we believe, and being climate deniers. So which way are you going to have it? And again, as with APSA and Unite here, like, how good is good enough? When is it be good enough? This is an incredibly important ethical question, and also becomes an interesting strategic question. The bigger strategic piece of this article, which again I'm going to put in the footnotes on peterloge.com and on Medium, is one way we run that this campaigns are being run, which is something we're going to talk about in a minute, is it is diffuse. It's a group of organizations around the world that appear to be completely disconnected. They have some overlapping board members. They've got some overlapping funders, one big one in particular, who just echo each other. Right? It's different names on the letterhead. It's different Twitter handles or X handles or whatever they are at this point. But it's the same messaging. Right? So it's kind of promoting the same drumbeat, which is strategically much more effective because now it's just kind of background noise. Oh, do you hear that? Oh yeah, of course, everybody's saying that. Rather than being able to dismiss it as just one more piece of nonsense from AEI or Coke, or pick your favorite liberal group, Code Pink, or whatever it is. So ethical question, and I also think strategic lesson. This article is worth a read.
Yeah, the thing I would add on that is, you're right. It's an ethical question, and it's also one that forces us to grapple with sort of the ebb and flow of money, right? Like, it is, I think, a lot easier to say, I will not take that money, that with a capital T, whatever we're talking about, when your budget is flush or growing, than when it's shrinking. And because that's when you're asking yourself, okay, we can take some money that I don't feel great about. And even if it's not coming with direct strings now, is going to leave us beholden to people we'd not like to be beholden to. Or we can stop doing important work that we continue to think is important. Right? Like it would be nice in an ideal world to not have to make that choice. But when you are staring at that specific choice, that's when you're kind of deciding which of these things is organizational muscle and which of these things is organizational bone. Like, what are the things that are so critical that we need to keep on doing them, and what sacrifices are we going to make? And if we're talking in the nonprofit world, since you are not revenue generating organizations, that's not what you are judged upon. Eventually, you're going to be in a spot where budgets are shrinking, and that's where you need to be real clear on what your ethical red lines are, because it just went from an easy decision to say, you know what, we're going to forsake that money. We don't like how it looks. We don't like where it's going to head, to, oh, wow, there's a real trade-off that we're going to face this year. There are people we're going to need to fire. There's going to be critical work that we're not going to do. Which thing is more important to us? That's not to say you always take the money. You don't always take the money. But I think it's very easy from when you're not the person making that decision to just say, like, yeah, you know what, like I would draw red lines all over. Like, I've only got one marker, it is red, let's start drawing. When you're actually faced with the low times of, okay, then we're going to need to cut something that we already do that we believe in, that's when everything gets a lot harder. And you need to be clear on what are the real red lines, not just the optical red lines.
I think there are two pieces to that. One is those choices, as you say, get super hard about what we're not going to do. And it's not just activity, right? It's who is going to suffer because of what we're not doing, right? Is it fewer school lunches? Is it fewer feminine hygiene products? Is it less advocacy for climate? What specifically won't happen? And when you talk about laying people off, like budgets get cut, you lay people off. They're not people in the abstract, right? It's Dave, and Dave has kids. Or it's the young person who just graduated from the School of Media and Public Affairs at GW, well-trained, eager, interesting, smart, hire them, please hire them, who went to a school that costs, if you pay the full price, $75,000 a year. You let them go because you have an idea of what's pure and right and just. Kid can't pay student loans, can't make rent. And that kid has a name and a family and like a dog. Like, these are real choices. So the time to make these choices, as you say, Dave, is not when times are tight, or not even necessarily when times are flush. Decide ahead of time. These are my values. These are the criteria. These are how I'll make my decision. So when you're rich, you can decide whose money and not to take using the same criteria as when you're poor. The time to decide to make a hard decision is not when you're in a hard spot.
Good point.
All right. We need to get to the heart of it because we're running out of time. And this is pissing me off, Dave.
You're not supposed to piss off one. That's my thing. Why are you stealing my vibe? What's going on?
It's a family show. I shouldn't be using such strong language, but sir, the stakes are high. 2 weeks ago, we 2 weeks
all right,
ago,
Columbo.
I just one thing puzzles me. Just a thing. If you do this on Zoom, the Zoom looks kind of cool. Right. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about attacks on fundamental democratic institutions, and specifically attacks on our friends and colleagues and researchers looking at mis and disinformation online, and the need for academics to start playing offense and to make the case for what they're doing and why it's relevant and real in the world. And we promised to get real specific in this episode, so we're going to. And I want to kick it off by, again, looking to the New York Times, a piece that ran on August 7th. Headline is GOP contenders feed voter distress in courts, schools, and military. And the article, which again is really well worth a read, points out that trust in public institutions has been declining. Republicans are attacking these institutions, all of which is then undermining support for these institutions. You cannot continually and relentlessly attack institutions on which we rely and expect those institutions to survive. My first boss in Congress used to say, whenever we'd write these missives saying those people in Washington, you cannot burn down a house and expect to occupy it. And we can't hope that democracy will out. Oh, but it'll be fine because we're enlightened and enlightened democracy. Like, nobody woke up one morning and thought, Rousseau, right? it's learned, it's practiced, it's promoted. We've got to make the case for strong institutions that are willing to learn and get better and grow with us in order for democracy to survive. And it's time for academics, for the business community, for the press, for everybody involved to start playing offense and stop either hoping to hit the kid in the ugly pants and not you wearing the ugly hat, or hope that these guys go away, because they're not. They're attacking you because it raises money, gets them on TV, and gets them clicks. They have to be punished or they will not stop, and democratic institutions will continue to be threatened, and that ends very, very badly.
Yeah. So the thing I want to connect this to is an essay that I've written, or this is in an essay I wrote a while back, and it's also a talk I used to give that I titled "World Without Wizards." And in that, the key concept that I tried to raise up is that I think on the grand scale, the debate that we've been waging over the past few years has not been between left and right, but between it's simple and it's complicated.
Yeah.
And from a comms perspective, the sad thing is that it's simple is a much easier story, right? So we see this with, dating back to Trump, though he still does it today, but you saw this so clearly in Trump 2016, where the story he was telling was the reason why your life isn't the way you want it to be is that the government is full of crooks and idiots. Bring me in, I'm going to fire the crooks and idiots, and then things will be better. And that's a really that's a really comforting story. Like, would that were true? And it has as supporting evidence that there are sometimes crooks and idiots in government. Like, it's not free of them.
Right.
The other camp, the other side, argues that government and governance is fundamentally complicated and hard, and that what we need is strong institutions filled with people who are doing their best and tomorrow will try to do a bit better. That then promises that if you elect this government, they will try to do better and things will hopefully get slightly better along the way. That is, from a public narrative perspective, utter shit. Like, that's not a compelling story. And it unfortunately is actually true. So that's the distinction. Like, the easiest thing in the world is to shit on all institutions because that is an easy, compelling story to tell. It will get you clicks. It will get you TV time. Like, there are short run successes that come from that. And the problem is that since it is based fundamentally on a narrative lie, when you burn down all institutions, what you are left with is just a heaping wreckage. And that means, coming back to your point, the only way to defend this stuff is to recognize that the fundamental story that we are telling happens to be true and is also a tough sell. And so we need to unite behind the fundamental claim that, yeah, government and governance is complicated and hard and it takes work. Now, the one caveat I would put in there is when there are crooks and idiots, one ought to rhetorically assault them, right? Like, I would say it is a good idea to challenge the legitimacy of this Supreme Court because they are acting in illegitimate ways, and it is for the best that they knock that off. That, like, I don't think it's a problem when you challenge the legitimacy of the government because you see a real problem there. But one should do that, like, one should only undermine the legitimacy of institutions rhetorically when what you're trying to call out is that their behavior is ruinously bad. Otherwise, what we need to do is be trying to build institutions that are worth the public trust, because otherwise you don't get to have a large society. Government and governance are just too goddamn complex.
So I absolutely, a couple of things. So back to the Times piece, to your point about incentives, quoting here, there's little doubt about the political incentives behind the statements. These are the ones attacking the IRS, the FBI, the military, you name it. Polls show that Americans' trust in their institutions has fallen to historical lows, with Republicans exhibiting more doubt across the broad swath of public life. The proliferation of attacks has alarmed both Republicans and Democrats who worry about the long-term impact on American democracy. Public confidence in core institutions, from the justice system to voting systems, is fundamental to a durable democracy, particularly at a time of sharp political division. And it isn't just true in large democracies. This is also true in smaller democracies. As our regular listener, I'm going to be optimistic, listeners, plural. No, I do a lot of work with the Basques, and the Basque government and Spain recently had a couple of elections, and the ruling party of the Basque country, the PNV, has run into trouble because their message has been, look, we're good bureaucrats. Things are running well. Please vote for us again. And it's just not compelling. I think it's accurate. The more compelling argument is coming from a smaller party called Bildu, which is expressing anger and frustration. And many of the policies are the same, but they're connecting to people's lives, right? The traditional democratic message of vote for us, we're smarter than you, is failing. It's a terrible message. The message has to be, this is what works for us. This is what we need. This is in us together. And to your point about institutions, calling them out when they need to be fixed and improved is different than saying the institution needs to be burned down. It's saying that the institution is suffering because of the behavior of some bad, bless you, of some bad actors. We need to chase the actors out because they're weakening the institution, right? So for example, with the Supreme Court, Justice Thomas doesn't belong there.
Right.
And the reason he doesn't belong there is because he's using his office, this privileged office, right? From which he can't be fired, that oversees so much of America's life to his own personal gain. And that cheats the American people, that cheats the promise we make to each other as a governed and governors and a governed, right? It breaks the promise of a fair and independent judiciary by saying, look, I got the cool robe and the big seat. I get a fancy pants RV, right?
Who wants to buy this for me? I will be hearing your cases.
And I'll be hearing your cases.
Yeah.
Right. And I got this fancy pants RV and this rich guy helped me out. So best of luck when you come talk to me. And even if he is honest and above board and can somehow parse all of this, there's the appearance of impropriety. That's bad for the institution. That's bad for trust. Right. It's not saying that never attack the IRS. Of course, attack the IRS if they're going after people unfairly, but that's because we need the IRS to be fair and strong and good, right? You've got to, this isn't a Pollyannish, the FBI is always the good guys, right? But it is a recognition that we need the FBI. We need effective law enforcement. So let's find ways to make people believe them and trust them and become better and help protect us. And we have to make that case. Advocates have to make that case.
Yeah. We need
How do we do it,
institutions that deserve our trust.
Strong institutions that deserve our trust. So specific, this is our last episode for a while. What are the takeaways we're going to assign homework. Good news, when we come back, you'll be turning in your essays. And you can't just have, heypi.com write it for you, which is a fun chatbot, but have you done heypi.com?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So heypi, H-E-Y, pi, like the number.com. It's generative AI, but it's very chatty. It's kind of fun. I should ask it about you.
You're kind of lonely, huh?
You're
finding AIs. You're finding chatty AIs just to talk to.
I don't get out much.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I've got this big lonely office. I'm going to wander around my now big office, to which I now have a key that works, which is sort of a pleasant change. Walk around the office and wearing Kleenex boxes on my feet, muttering to myself, talking to my laptop. Hey, Pi, how am I doing?
You know what I was going to get you for your birthday was a new set of Kleenex boxes for your feet.
I'm a size 11, so just if you're planning ahead. What should the people be doing?
So go on offense and build institutions.
Thanks, everybody.
But look, like building institutions means the iterative work of making things that you have agency over better and doing it with people, right? Like figuring out what are the things that we already have and how do we strengthen them, or if we don't have anything at all, how do we start something, and then putting in the iterative work to make it better and make it so that it can stand on its own. That is rarely rocket science. It's rarely new ideas. It's the hard work of implementation to make good but complicated ideas work a bit better. Like,
so
goddamn sweat equity.
All right, so I want to let's make this super specific because all this is really good and sort of abstract. We need to build trust in democratic institutions. We have to have institutions worthy of our vision of what they might be. We've got to live up to the always already broken promise of the American ideal. All of those things are true. At the same time, we've got to stop the beatings, right? And one guy doing the beating is Chairman Jordan.
Yep.
So if I want to go after, and Chairman Jordan is engaging in these meetings, partially, he may believe what he is saying, but it's also
No, it
true that
doesn't.
he's,
No, it doesn't.
I'm gonna, like, I've never talked to him about it, right? I'm not going to try to climb
Yeah,
inside the
but
guy's
like
head.
I play poker. I know when somebody is obviously bluffing because he likes to bluff every hand. That's Jim Jordan.
But
He's
it's
bluffing.
also the case that it raises money, gets him on TV,
Yeah.
does all of that kind of stuff, national profile, all these kinds of things. So if you want to make him stop, if people behave their incentives,
Mhm.
as we agree they do, what specific things can people be doing to bop Chairman Jordan on the nose? That's a metaphor, people. Please do not chase a member of Congress around with a rolled up newspaper. What do we do? Which should be, do you remember what was it with God, in the
I can
80s,
already tell you this is going to be too old of a reference, but bring it on, please.
they made a change to what Social Security, and all these old
Mhm.
people get really angry and like surrounded cars of members of Congress and these women with them. It was, I'll put it in the footnotes. Doesn't matter. What do we do? What can people do to rhetorically bop Chairman Jordan on the nose to persuade him to pick on somebody else his own size?
Well, it's tough outside of his district, obviously, because
So what do you do in the district? What do you do in the district?
I mean, in the district, you identify what are the parts of the district, who are the like powerful interests or local leaders in the district, with enough authority that he would feel obligated to listen to them, and you try to get them involved. Outside of the district, though, what you all, because I think he's mostly performing national level incentives, right? Like I don't think he's there to try to strengthen his district back home. I think he's there because when he looks in the mirror, he sees a president, and what he wants to do is play in national politics. And so I think what you got to do is help to harden all the targets that he thinks are soft targets. And that means swinging back at him. That means making it so that he faces resistance and ridicule when he picks cheap fights because they think they're cheap. You make them more expensive. That's broadly what I would say.
Right. So I would add two pieces to that, even more specific. It's true that he's not playing to the home district. The only way he's going to lose an election is in a primary, because this isn't a way to generate broad votes. But it is true that he's not facing significant discomfort from people about whom he cares back home. You want to know who he cares about in his district, go to his finance reports and go to his website. On his website, he will quote people. He'll put his own clips up about what press he's in. He'll brag about things he's doing. He'll have pictures of himself with constituents. Broadly speaking, also in local communities, the people who matter are heads of the local chambers of commerce, local faith leaders, presidents of local colleges and universities, people who either receive federal money, rely on federal money, or can wind up in the press. Get them talking points, right? Get to the head of a local university, not some political science professor. Political science professors are afraid to cross the picket lines in Los Angeles. President of a local university who relies on money from the National Science Foundation to say, hey, chairman, you're picking on all of these federal funding streams, which are funding this university. Without that federal funding, this little economic engine on which our community relies slows way down. Stop doing that. Right? It's local faith leaders saying, you know what, we're having a harder time in the pews because all people want to do is argue about national politics. And nobody wants to talk about how we come together spiritually as a community, because they look on TV and they see their congressman arguing about all this other stuff. Stop doing that. Make it locally irritating. Sand in the shoes. Then nationally, simultaneously, you just make fun of them. And at this point, as far as I can tell, Chairman Jordan's frustration is with math. Right. So he is calling in these researchers to testify in front of him. And these academics count things, weigh things, and measure things. Like there used to be 10. Now there are 15. Right. Or this, like whatever. And then they sort of speculate about how you go from 10 to 15. These other things happen at the same time. They probably caused the 15, or we use complicated math to get to the 15. Right. So Jordan's complaint is with people's ability to count. right? And he just doesn't like the numbers they're coming up with. It's like blaming a wrestler who misses a weigh-in on the scale industrial complex. Somehow Joe Biden and the global Illuminati are in cahoots with the pack, whatever it is at this point, to like weigh his. No, your wrestler missed the weigh-in because your wrestler isn't training right.
Well, when it comes to Jim Jordan and wrestlers, there's a lot that he's has a habit of not noticing.
There is that. But it's the point is you don't blame the scale if your wrestler misses a weigh-in.
Mm-hmm.
Don't blame the math. If Jordan were calling people before him and saying, look, I've been going over the multivariate regression analysis here, and I've got some real questions, like he's not.
Mm-hmm.
He said,
Right.
15, holy cow. Pick on him for opposing math. Mock him openly, make it a little uncomfortable, make it a little uncomfortable back home. A little bit of sand in each shoe. Eventually the man's going to go find something else to do.
Yeah.
And it's finding out who's on TV doing that. And don't dox them online and threaten to do whatever. Pick on them.
Yeah.
It's Red Bike Guy from a bunch of weeks ago, making fun of the guys in khakis.
You ridicule him in ways that he's going to feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take
finding
much.
the ways that are going to feel that he's going to feel are hard. This is the thing that I've raised in my class before is because I still teach Saul Alinsky. And Alinsky was saying in the early 70s that ridicule is your most potent weapon. And I raised the point with my students that I think that's probably less true in a lot of cases today, because an awful lot of our political elites are now shameless. Like it's very difficult to affect Ted Cruz with ridicule because he's a ridiculous person. It's basically impossible to affect Donald Trump with ridicule. He is a ridiculous person. The same is, I think, in many ways true with Jim Jordan, that identifying the things that actually sting a bit isn't as easy as it used to be. And that's because we now have political elites who no longer take sort of the noblesse oblige of their position very seriously. But like that makes it harder to do this, but it's still sort of fundamental principles. You want to be offering sand in the gears, you want to be offering resistance, you want to make it hurt enough because people behave their incentives. And if they think these are cheap wins that, get them through the news cycle, they're going to do more of that.
And I think it's not just, so the mockery piece I tend to agree with, but also, but do it in a way that isn't, oh, I can't believe he mispronounced that word, or what an ugly tie. Nobody wears.
Because that wouldn't hurt.
It would, right, exactly. It wouldn't hurt him. It wouldn't hurt him. But the core of Jordan's complaint is he doesn't like what researchers are finding.
Mm-hmm.
So make fun of that.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sorry you couldn't find the Afi Conan as a kid. Here's $1. By the way, that's a
How'd you
thing.
get to Afi Conan?
You hide it. Maybe he didn't find it. Maybe he feels bad.
I feel like that's a reference that isn't going to work for Jim Jordan. Just saying.
But I'm trying to it occurred to me. Okay. I don't know. The point is, if you're going to mock him, be on message or on point with your mockery. Like the mockery has to advance to the point you're trying to make, which is researchers are finding what's there. If Jim Jordan doesn't like what they're finding, maybe the problem isn't with the looking, it's with what they're finding. So make fun of that. Right. Rather than why won't he wear a tie? Like he's a doofus. You ought to wear dress like a grown-up. Remember the US House of Representatives dress like a friggin' grown-up. Yeah. That ship has sailed. Yeah. And it's also off message because it's not working on strengthening the institutions, promoting researchers, promoting scientists, saying, hey, by the way, July, hottest month ever since we've been recording these things. That seems problematic. Let's solve that. Like focus on messages that help you get there rather than, I can't believe he doesn't wear a tie, because who cares?
Yeah. And this also ties in with a point that I was talking about a bit last week, which is I've increasingly over the past year and a half we've been recording this, been thinking more and more about how the core habit should be to identify the frame where what you're arguing for is reasonable and your opponent's stance is clearly ridiculous. Right. And if that's clear and resonant, then that's also going to be a thing that tends to make them uncomfortable. Right? Like the case that we're talking about, the bit from it that always stands out to me is Jordan and his allies have been complaining at length about how these researchers conducted public health research and then communicated it to the Surgeon General
Right.
as though that's a bad thing. Like, I'm pretty sure we're okay with that, man. What the hell are you talking about?
Right.
So your point about Matt, like
the point of universities is to do that. I want college professors looking at stuff and calling doctors at the CDC going, hey, I saw something, seems to be hurting children. Maybe we should look into that. Like, that's the friggin' point of funding the universities. That's what NIH money is for.
Yeah. And if he really wants to argue against that, he's welcome to do so. But I'm pretty sure he's going to look like a fucking idiot because, spoiler alert, he's a fucking idiot.
And so it's that kind of stuff. And then again, tactically, my argument would be to bring it back to this article from the Times. It's a diffuse attack, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't, office hours of Karpf and Loge 501c3 that's going to do these attacks. It's everybody pushing. If you see an op-ed in a local paper, make sure that everybody in the congressional delegation gets it. Move it around to the state legislature. Hey, did you see this? Did you see this? Did you see this? Look for people who are saying things or advancing the message you want, which is Jordan is obviously just trying to get clicks rather than solve problems, and push those around, and then write things like that. Write a letter to the editor, go to a town hall and go, hey, I couldn't help but notice you on TV picking on some guy because you didn't like what he found. Our roads still suck. Are you going to fix that? Or are you, as I saw you on Fox, and you're talking about a political scientist in a different state at a school my kid can't get into, but there was a shooting at my kid's school last week. Can you talk about that? And it's a diffuse, broad attack. And then again, in ways that say he is letting the institution down. The institution can be better than this. It should be better than this. It has been better than this. Jim Jordan is an embarrassment to the idea of Congress. And Congress is a pretty cool idea.
The job of congressman has to include governing. And if Jim Jordan isn't interested in doing that, then like that's a bit of a problem. Like maybe go on Fox instead.
He can get a podcast. Apparently anybody can get those.
But will he get the numbers we get? Will he get the numbers we get? Man, that would be the real savage takedown of Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan, you get fewer listeners than office hours of Karpf and Loge.
That's a challenge. That's a challenge, listeners. I'm going plural now. And by the way, we did hear you mocked the YouTube viewers, and we heard from a couple of people.
One person. Whoa,
two.
I only heard from one. I think you imagined the other.
No, there were two. We're in the low single digits confirmed. That's what I got. So people of the pod. You got anything else, Dave? Do you have anything else you want to rant at? We've been almost an hour, but it's the last one. So listen to it in chunks, people.
Since we're going off air for a little while, we're going on hiatus for a while. I just want to reflect for the past year and a half. Elon Musk kept getting dumber. I feel like that's going to keep happening. Ron DeSantis went from the goofus who people think is serious to the goofus who everyone thinks is a goofus. I thought that I told a couple people that my strategy for this, or my plan for this podcast, was to radicalize you, and I thought that was going to happen largely because I expected the November election was going to go so poorly. We would have to face down that, wow, there's now a bunch of secretaries of state who have said they're going to overturn the elections. Are we still really having faith in this stuff? Like the real positive note has been there has been some progress in the right direction that I didn't really expect to come. So I want to reflect on that things can get better than Karpf fears. And also the path to having strong institutions and a government full of people who actually think governing is their job is still really long and is going to require a lot of work. I'm going to keep working towards that. I know my and your students are going to keep working towards that. I hope our listeners, when they no longer have us to keep them company during their dog walks, their very long dog walks, I hope they also find ways in their communities or throughout the country to try to help rebuild strong institutions and have a government worth governing that takes it seriously.
Absolutely agree. It's I've been reflecting on this a lot as well, that what do we do? What do we tell our students, right? So we've got these really bright students in the School of Media and Public Affairs,
The
and
best.
they come here because they want to change the world, and they look at people like you and me and others with whom we work, adjunct faculty and full-time faculty. We've had some remarkable academic careers and professional careers, Pulitzers, winning campaigns, and they say, I want to be like that. And they show up, and we're in the moment we're in, right? We're the leading Republican contender for the presidency of the United States has been indicted for attempting a coup and hid national secrets in his bathroom. We say, like, what do you say to him?
Mhm.
Right. And I keep coming back to this idea that we talked ourselves into this moment. We can talk ourselves into the next moment, right? There wasn't a box of democracy people found somewhere. This was thought and wrestled and argued over, and it was complicated, and awful trade-offs were made, and it's been getting better and getting better, sometimes getting worse and then getting better, but we've talked ourselves into this position. We can talk ourselves into a better position. Nothing is inevitable, and it is up to us. And I think the way to do it is by thinking strategically, by thinking with a bit of nuance, and also by working hard and working locally, right? Talk to your neighbors. Community isn't like, I was very privileged and lucky, consider myself exceptionally lucky that I've been able to have the political career I've had, but working in Congress isn't where I've made the biggest differences in my career. It's working in classrooms, it's working in my community. So please go work in Congress, work in state legislatures. Show up when your city council member has a Zoom meeting about crime in your area. Volunteer, mentor somebody, just be smarter and better. Because I think if we don't, the bad guys are going to win. The way the good guys win is if the good guys show up and play.
Yeah. And the way I think about it, particularly after 2016, was democracy is fragile. And it requires tending, it requires work, it requires skill. And so that means find ways to help, because the way things get worse is when we take them for granted and don't put in the work to keep a fragile, worthwhile thing working.
On that note, people of the pod, it's been a fun ride. We were temporarily stepping off of it. We look forward to joining you again soon. Dave, thanks for being a co-conspirator for the past, 8-9 years, however long we've been doing this. And we'll
this has been great. And listeners, I promise I'm going to try to annoy Peter at faculty meetings enough that he'll step down early and we can start potting again. That's my promise to you.
I gotta tell you, it's a pretty low bar. If you're an SMPA, drop by and say hi. If not, reach out to us on the socials, or not as you may be. It's a lot of fun. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Or have a bar mitzvah or a wedding, and we'll go to it. We'll perform.
We have demands, but yes, we'll be there. Bye.